Hey folks, hope you're doing well. On today's show, we're going to talk a little bit about rules and laws. Why are they important? Why do they matter? It's a question my cousin Amy posed just a couple days ago. So it's still a little windy out. We've got some nice weather, but the wind's moving through. I'll try and find a spot to hunker down and do most of this where the wind doesn't bother us too much. So that'll be it. Rules. Why are rules important? So let's look both ways here. Across the street. All right, let's start the show. All right, guys, so the question today is, why do we need rules? Why are rules important? I think the short answer is because people kind of suck. You know, if you don't have rules, this kind of stuff happens. You know what I'm saying? Look at that. Nonsense, right? One of my favorite rules of all time is the old don't mess with Texas rule. Now, this has nothing to do with Texas Pride. It's an anti-litter campaign started by Lady Bird Johnson back in the day. So don't mess with Texas, you litter, you get a big fine. But yeah, more than that, I think if we go back in history, Amy, laws really came about once humans moved on from hunter-gathering, right, and formed societies. Industry jobs were created. We had idle time on our hands. We all know what that does. So it was actually King Hammurabi, the famous Babylonian king, who first inscribed these laws, these regulations, these rules in a stone that was discovered. This was around 2000 BC. So we see back then that laws were needed to control society, to keep people in line. These rules that Hammurabi set forth influenced the Old Testament, the Ten Commandments, things like that. It was the Babylonians that created this idea of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So every society came up with their own rules, their own set of laws based on varying things. The idea here is to control society, to make sure that it functions properly. Now those laws, those rules that Hammurabi and the Babylonians have become famous for were mostly regulating commerce, trade, how much should someone get paid for an ox. They also dealt with the issues of inheritance and taxation and things like that. And we can note that throughout history that it's become a necessity to regulate commerce and business. There are still people who believe, I guess, that a truly free market, laissez-faire economic system in the vein of like true extreme libertarianism is something that can actually work. But throughout history, we've seen time and time again that's just not the case. Even when you have lax regulations on commerce and industry and economies, you see humans taking advantage of this. It leads to massive wealth inequality, environmental degradation, exploitation of labor. Back in the second half of the 19th century in the United States, what we call the Gilded Age, you know, this period was not a good time for the vast majority of Americans. Children had to work. Many people lived in squalor, but we did see the benefits of industrialization. Eventually the progressive era comes around and we get more regulation in industry, in the economy, labor laws. And then throughout the 20th century, we see the rise of a strong, vibrant middle class, a working class. So yeah, I mean, I think at this point, most people agree that commerce and economies need some amount of regulation in order to function, in order to not collapse in on themselves. Then of course you have the laws that regulate human behavior, laws against murder, theft, adultery, things like that. These laws, I think we all understand, need to be in place primarily as a deterrent, but also to punish that small minority of people who would actually do things like that. You have to understand, even if just 1 in 10 humans were to display psychopathic or sociopathic tendencies. That's still about 1 billion people out there who are inclined to hurt other people, to steal, to murder, to kidnap, to rape. So we do need to have those rules in place in order to tamp down on that kind of behavior. There are also laws that regulate behavior that aren't so vital. I think we think of these blue laws that we have in a lot of states now. You can't buy liquor on Sundays, or marijuana is illegal. In recent years, we've become a lot more lax on these laws, and we're working to change them. I think we realize that these crimes are really victimless, and there are better ways to go about dealing with alcohol and drug abuse. It can be regulated, it can be taxed, but we don't need to be throwing people in jail because they've got a small bag of marijuana. So yeah, you could take an analogy here, for instance. Take baseball. A baseball game without rules is not a baseball game at all. It's just a bunch of people standing around on a grassy field. Some people might try to make up their own rules for these games, but generally that comes at the expense of everyone else who's playing, We need these rules to make sure that the game moves forward and that it's fun for everybody. So yeah, there you have it. Rules and laws are important because they're vital to making sure that our society stays functional, stays fair, stays free, and stays relatively equitable. Now, what do we think Mr. Dangles thinks about rules and laws? He's sitting out here in his field. He's got this rickety old fence keeping him in. If we think of this fence as rules, it's more of a deterrent than anything. I think Mr. Dangles could get out of here if he really wanted to. But would he? Right. Right, so that'll be it for today's show, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. Say hi to Mr. Dangles. And we'll see you guys tomorrow.